Our first item is going to be the discuss, review, first draft of the Resolution 23-20, amending the Town of Westlake's Employees Personnel Manual. Come on down, Sandy.
All right. Mayor, Council, thank you for having me here today. We will go over a few items, how we came to our first draft on the personnel manual. My intent is to answer any questions that I can or research anything that I don't know too. So the personnel manual consists of history and culture of the organization. It includes policies that are required, good to have, and optional policies. The intent of the policy manual is to be updated each year. It had been a while since it was last updated.
How long?
2019 was the last time it had been updated. It takes a while because we broke down from top to bottom, going through checking to see which new laws have been put out there. And each legislative session, it requires, there are many times requirements that come out that must be submitted into your personnel manual. Some of the resources that I utilized, and not I, as a team, the department heads and leads were inclusive of this review, were, of course, the personnel, federal and state personnel laws. TML puts out a great employment law handbook, TMHRA, a sample handbook, and I tapped into a lot of the surrounding cities to see what their practices were and how we would compare to those. Of course, our attorney reviewed the personnel manual, what we have so far, and then we also utilized a second attorney on a section for FLSA, and that section mainly had to do with our fire department, just because it's so unique that they accrue their hours. I'm going to open this up because I don't know how y'all would like to go over this. I know for time purposes, I could go over each. Oops. Okay.
Sandy, the one thing I would ask, and Casey, I know you're in the, just as we are kind of getting all this together, kind of under this new council, I mean, I don't want to speak for you, but my expectations, our expectations are that these things are reviewed every year, they're updated, we have our kind of year-end checklist, right, that we do all the things we have to do, and we have great formality around.
Absolutely.
Is that the path we're taking?
For sure.
Excellent.
And especially each legislative year, then TML will do a great job to help us, since we aren't sitting down in Austin to say, what are the new laws that just came out as far as with the attorney that are requirements that must be added into a personnel. Okay.
And just for context, what are you hoping to achieve today with us, and then when are you looking to finalize the manual?
First draft, so I know that y'all have had this draft for a few weeks now to review any questions that you may have come up with or need clarification. Again, if I know the answer, I can answer it for you. If not, I have my notebook here. I'll take some notes, research it, and then get back to you. But the earlier, the better we can get this voted on. And
okay.
And kind of to follow up on Dave's question, like, as we go through, and I love the fact that you're looking at other towns, and like, I guess what I would want to know, when I read this, I don't know what other towns are doing, but like, if we're different, why? Okay. Like the fire department comment, I'm going, why? Well, other towns have fire departments. Why is ours different?
Okay. So on this, would y'all like me to go line by line, or were there things that you came up with that are just standing out?
For me, so some of these things, there's devils in the details on some of these things. And so for me, for this year, we experienced a a significant of devils in the details of accounting, right? So the personnel manual says this, and when someone decides to leave or whatever, there's these unfunded payouts. So for example, people accrue leave up to a couple hundred hours, and we do not account for that in the budget per se.
So those are all budget hits.
Those are budget hits.
Fine.
We had not accounted.
And we had not accounted. So there's a little bit of unfunded. There are items in here that, in particular, this year has translated into several $100,000 of money that went out to people, and it was devil's in the details. So to me, these personnel manuals should be: you get something, I get something. Like it should be an equitable solution where it's a way of governance of making sure that employees are treated fairly, but also the town needs to be treated fairly too. And so there has to be an equilibrium in some of these things.
Mr. Mayor, I think this is really important at this part of our administration. Penny, I don't know how we do this normally, but like to me, this is like a Saturday work session. I'm going through that and having you tell us like this is kind of standard, this is where we're different. Make sure that we understand all of these rules cumulatively that we can get through that. I think that's hard to do in a setting like this. I agree.
No, it's very hard, yes.
Okay.
But the point of this was to introduce it because it's been off the calendar for a very, very long time.
Okay.
And kind of put into people's mind of, we have this thing out here, and it's very impactful.
Yeah.
And very impactful to the budget, to the personnel. For example, if you had an employee that retired from another government, they could have cashed out their leave, come here, done a couple more years, and retired again and cashed out that leave. And so our policy says for retirement, you cash out your sick leave and all this other stuff. In other governments I've worked for, they basically say you got to use it within 2 years or a year. And so it's not this giant accrual of 10 years and you get this giant payout at the very end. It's like an alternative form of retirement.
Just going back, I guess, to my original question about what are we trying to achieve and when do we want to finalize. If the rest of council agrees, maybe if you were to walk through each of these items, just so we begin to understand the rationale, why they're being proposed. I know from my perspective, what I would like to do is read the whole policy document and then probably have a lot of questions, and then we can either have a Saturday session or, when we come to formal vote, we can talk about the details. But I think for today, this might be useful.
Yeah, and I figured this setting was going to be a little, it took us, this meetings with department heads, we were in there probably a good 6 hours each time we met, just really going over. Something that you would think is simple, a tattoo policy that we sat in there, okay, what's the norm, what's acceptable? Oh, but we're Westlake. Oh, but, so it was a lot of discussion that went into making any of these decisions and trying to see in the future, are we losing good people because we're going to be stuck on a policy? So it was a lot of discussion that went into each little section. That was just a policy I threw out there, but there were many practices that were happening, but maybe not documented. So as I started going through stuff, I would look back and they're like, oh, it's on a letter or it's here. We need it in policy and written. So again, for us to sit there and go through, some of it was just really, yes, FMLA was in there. That's a federal law. But I went through there and picked up language that was up to date and inclusive of all the latest rules in there and just cleaned it up. If we were missing totally something, went out. If it was required, added that in there. Social media was a big piece.
Good.
Of course, John was involved in there. But what do we do if an employee starts bashing the town, and on their personal social media? Do we have any recourse from there? So those are just examples of things that didn't exist that we put in there. So again, I'm open for a Saturday workshop if we want to do that.
Evening.
A Saturday would be better for me.
Preferably like on Super Bowl day or something like that.
Yeah, Master Sunday
that's
would be
too
good.
Yeah, just as long as we have advance notice. I think I didn't realize this was coming on the agenda. Otherwise, I would have read the policy in detail and marked it up, and then we could have had a very in-depth discussion.
Okay.
But when this got posted, it was just insufficient time to do that alongside everything else. So
Did y'all receive it? Because I did send
yeah,
out. Oh, I had sent
Yeah.
out the old policy.
yeah,
Okay.
got it.
Just one kind of basic question. Do we have the right technology to house this, make the adjustments? Do we have software package? How do we do this?
All Word and a PDF.
Okay, there's
The actual personnel
There's not a
manual?
good policy, procedure, things for towns that here?
There was, but honestly, the shell was in there. It's really, and I looked at several surrounding cities, and ours is pretty comparable. I mean, actually, the formatting was good. It was just going back in there and looking through everything that we might be missing. I don't have everyone's answer from this other cities, but I did start like some spreadsheets of what looks good from the other city that we're not doing, or what are we doing better in our town.
So this is a big Word document right now. the
Yes.
foundation. Okay.
And sometimes the policies, for example, if you don't explicitly say something, can an employee run a business out of town hall?
Well, that's actually one that I was going to ask about specifically. And I'm sure that'll become an issue when we do sit and actually go through the policy. But, what do we say about outside employment?
We added that. We added a sentence that read that outside employment, and there was a policy already that you had to ask, and I don't have them all memorized, but you had to have permission from a supervisor for any outside employment. It can't interfere with your day job. But we went ahead and added a sentence that you can't be working on your outside job during working hours. I know that would seem common sense, but just now we have something to fall back on that says, yes, you did know that you can't be doing this.
All right, you want to go through the highlights of each section that you can?
I mean, just ADA, we updated. I mean, I could sit here and just say,
We've got an hour. So,
we have an
I
hour.
know.
We have time.
I mean, honestly, like I said, I would have happily read. I didn't know we were doing this today until the agenda came out. So,
Okay.
Does this apply to the school too? And does it apply to the fire department?
Yes, it applies in general, overarching for the fire department, but the fire department also takes it an extra level on certain things, and I'll go back to the famous tattoos. So tattoos for the fire department, they cannot have any visible tattoos. So they can tape the policy, existing policy, as long as we're within constraints of the law, and taper it to what they'd like to do. So on that one, they can't have any visible. We went with we can't have excessive tattoos or in certain places. So just kind of that middle ground on there.
Just to clarify, you're saying the fire department has a separate policy manual, or they just have an amended?
Procedural manual that they are requiring. Is that what you call it, Chief?
Next contestant, come on down.
Sir, good evening, Council, Mayor. We have a separate policy manual. Most of that revolves around operational policies. However, there is a section in there that's administrative, and like she says, that we dive down a little deeper as to what the town does. But the town always comes first in everything we do. Then we'll usually have something more specific to just the way we operate, because it's just a different animal, if you will, that requires a little more detail than what the towns generally, and that's common practice across all cities.
But
and
who
towns.
amends, updates, and approves that?
We do that ourselves.
Does that come to
If
council?
there's something that like really gets into the town or whatever, then we'll send that out to the attorney and make sure he reviews that. Sometimes we'll bring in the town manager or whatever, which that rarely happens because most of our stuff is usually at that well below what the town is, so it doesn't really cross up into that.
But are you all still governed by this policy manual, at least from a town employment perspective?
Primarily, yes.
Okay.
Town manual first.
Okay.
Everything else in our manual comes secondary to the town.
Okay.
So, like I said, most of our stuff just really revolves around operational stuff, such as running calls, how we act on calls, and stuff like that. More tactical type stuff.
Right. Okay.
And so in federal government, sometimes these manuals, there's like a version, especially in organizations that are very heavily contract, they'll have paragraphs to say, and all town rules and laws apply to the contractors working, conflicts of interest, reporting, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Do we do that with our contracts?
There's nothing, I don't recall seeing any specific information on contracts.
Yeah. So if
Good
I
point.
have
We
a bunch
could
of
add.
contractors working up here, and they're helping out for whatever, they should be abiding by those rules and laws. And I just want to make sure we're crossing the T's and dotting the I's. Are we carrying that thing forth? Obviously, some of our contractors are not permanent. So, like in federal government, they would call them SETA, scientific and engineering technical advisors.
But our contractors say they have to abide by the town policies and procedures.
But I just want to make sure it's in there, and we should be having our contracts written that way.
I agree.
And just to keep in mind, it's a personnel manual, and so we'll have overarching general rule, and then you should have a procedural manual that if it's specific to contracts, if it's specific to finance, those types of things. But you don't want to get too detailed into a personnel manual, and you'll see that at the end of a lot of the paragraphs, it'll just be referred to.
It'd be like, for example, someone being paid for by the town as a contractor, removing some
Sure.
artwork or something.
That's different. Yes.
Okay. Okay. Just saying.
Yes, that's in there. And since we have an hour, I'll go back to, I know one of the concerns with what you mentioned as far as the payouts, right? It had not been funded out. But in some of my research, looking into it, so what he's referring to is the sick leave policy. And it reads that if an employee meets the criteria to retire, then that employee may be paid out their sick leave at the time of retirement. So,
All of it?
yes.
So it rolls.
No, excuse me, 480 hours is the max right now.
Okay.
So there's a cap on there if, of course, it's going to take a little bit to get to 480, but if you meet that requirement, then you may be paid out your sick leave. So in a quick check around our surrounding cities, there's a town that does not do that. Then the next town over does do that. However, they cap theirs at 400 hours and may have put in a requirement that you need to have worked there for X number of years before this would apply. And part of the thought process behind that is you want your employees to be at work and not out a lot, but then yet rewarding them for that time served.
So can I ask you something? I'll apologize in advance from my corporate world.
Yeah.
Like most in corporate America, you're allotted so much vacation, and you're required to take it. We want our employees to take vacation, right? For several reasons: for themselves, their families, their mental health, but also, certain jobs you want people gone to see what's going on while they're gone. So is that normal in municipalities that they are forced to take, or they lose at least half of their allocated vacation for the year?
No, our vacation is rolling over, so we're not losing anything until you've maxed into that.
480 hours, which is 12 weeks.
Yes.
How do we track our vacation time?
We have a system, our payroll system, so we accrue at 3.08 per paycheck.
Okay, how do we track when they take it?
Timesheets or absence forms. Turn in an absence form when it's payroll week, then it's deducted from the system.
And our controls around that are good?
A supervisor signs off on it.
Okay, that's good.
So hypothetically, if I worked 8 10-hour days, I can take 2 days of comp time.
If you are an exempt employee, you can work up to 90 hours in a week and you're still going to make your salary. If you're non-exempt, after 40 hours, then we start paying it.
But is it 8 hours a day, or is it 80 hours over 2 weeks?
It's per week. FLSA has you read the rules per week, and that's how you determine any.
So, but if I were to work 15 hours, and 5 hours, wherever it was, and then I hit my 40, would there be comp time, and I would just take off the rest of the week?
If you are non-exempt. If you're exempt, thank you.
Okay.
Exactly. That's
No. I'm just asking that.
like you are now.
Hours.
All comp time now.
So one of the other changes, we had a couple of RIFT positions a couple weeks ago, and going through the policy, the way that it read was that you would be paid a week's salary for every year of service that you had with the town of Westlake
For severance.
for severance.
Correct.
And this is, of course, no fault of the employee of leaving. This was a financial decision and why they left. So that was what was in there. What's being proposed is that we put in a cap of 6 weeks, allowing the employee to have a little bit of time. If they've worked here for over 6 years, that would be the max that they could have as a payout if, in fact, the position was a reduction in force, not for any other.
And who made that change, or who's making that
It's just a
suggestion?
decision.
Discussion?
I propose that.
Yeah. I don't know that just for discussion, I don't know that I agree with that. I don't agree with how we handle vacation, letting someone accrue up to 12 weeks of vacation. That's just not healthy. But for tenured employees, that's pretty standard in the corporate world, right? You get a week or so for every year, and there's a cap on it. But it's my 2 cents.
Well, the problem is it turns into a counting thing too. So if we're going to say that, then we have to have a way of setting funds aside. Because if you're really riffing to save money, essentially paying someone out almost a year between their leave accrual and the severance is not exactly saving money.
Right. But I'd also say if organizations are run well, you shouldn't be riffing your most tenured employees.
True.
And that should be.
True.
Yes, I don't policy before. I don't want to mix too much of academy and town because they accrue in different ways. But just when you asked about the practice of saving time in the school world, even though they are out for these periods of time, let's say over the winter holiday, they're not actually being compensated for that time, but they're out. So at least it's some kind of a break there. But a school employee accrues 5 days of sick leave and 5 of personal each year. You see those numbers go to high numbers because they're saving them as well. One, they are having some kind of break, so they get away from work for a little while. But they save them because if they were to go to another public institution in Texas, they can take their state days with them. So
And
you'll
Dr.
see-
Wilson is working on updating school policy, correct?
Dr. Wilson has the consultant team. I've
Right.
worked with Janet on
Right.
the personnel manual, so we're going through some of the highlights. But the state mandates your state days.
Okay,
You
no,
don't
good.
know.
But I just want to make sure, as the mayor asked, this is for the town. I
Correct.
know through the group we've
Yes,
engaged, they're
yes.
helping with policies and procedures.
Correct. So just kind of that thought process of why do we save days? How do you, it's there.
And when we have our Saturday session to discuss all this, we're going to really need to have what other towns are doing with vacation accruals, just to have a sense of the market,
Say that again, Dr.
a sense of what our neighboring towns are
Oh,
doing.
I see.
Yeah.
It would help me, though, that there are certain policies that you're really wanting to look at, because if you see those...
Yeah,
are-
yeah. I'm
I
thinking
mean, that
about
was
the
3
vacation,
sheets of
the
just-
vacation accrual days.
Okay. Absolutely. We're pretty standard, I mean, from what I was looking at, but it would be, I'll come up and just say, these are our towns, this is what they're accruing. Again, there are some things that they're doing better that we're not doing, or vice versa.
I think the mayor said it, which I agree with 100%. Look, I'm pro-employee. I want to be pro-employee. I also want to protect the town and the residents as well, right? There's a fair balance there. As we've learned the hard way.
Anything else? I mean, dress code was basically, we added some of the policies in their uniforms concerns of if it does become a concern. Your social media was a big one, and that was a huge section in there. Inclement weather, just changing some of the wording on stuff, because while we were out, we were not technically closed to the public. We were all still answering either phone calls or doing work. We just weren't, the doors weren't open to the public here. So that was one of the word choices that we switched up. If we do work from home and in a situation like that, what are some of the rules that go along with that?
What was the social media policy?
You want to take a look at that?
Yeah.
Pull it up.
And then just while you're pulling that up, Stan, to what extent, I mean, how binding is this to on an employee? I mean, do they have to sign that they accept this, or is it just the town retains the right to dismiss?
I'm assuming you have the employee sign if they've received it.
Yeah, in normal, I don't know that it had been done in a while, because I have seen other past years where they were signing off, but every employee should sign off that they've received the employee.
But agreed to abide by it?
Sure.
That's what they sign?
Yeah.
And we're up to date on those?
We are not.
Not up to date on
Not up to date. I saw some old ones, but that is common practice. It's up to the employee to read it or not read it,
Sure.
but then you also have this to fall back on that says, it says it here. Oh, well, I didn't read. Well, that's, you signed it.
And is it an annual renewal or just when they're hired?
Oh, the employee handbook, it should be annual. Every time you update the personnel
they
manual,
have to-
then they need to sign off on
There
it.
will be a tracking system in place.
Yes.
Okay.
So what, obviously some of these policies have financial impact.
Sure.
This is a Stan question. Do you have to give a period of notice, 30, 60 days before the change takes effect?
No, I don't think you do, but you typically annualize it in your budget. You absorb the fiscal impact each year in theory.
But what if I'm an employee and I'm like, I don't like, when I'm sitting here, I don't accept this change?
No, I don't think legally speaking you're required to give any notice to change it. I think it's a matter of practicality and phasing in from a policy perspective.
And so what if they obviously refuse?
Then I'll get to work here.
Well, they're employees at will. They're not contractual employees. So even though we have, and it's good practice to do so, we have the employees acknowledge receipt of the initial personnel manual and the updates there too. It's not a requirement legally that we do that, and it doesn't make it binding, less binding if they don't.
I mean, hypothetically, say you had like a 19-year employee that was, and it's like, I'm not going to accept this. And do I trigger all the other things of like, I get 19 weeks pay this and this because I didn't accept this?
That's a good question, because take the example of, accruing 1 week of severance per year you've worked here. And let's say we change that for whatever reason. Can we make that retroactively apply to those who have longer tenure?
That, or in certain policies, I would ask that we grandfather
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree.
anybody in
that's
that
a-
house met
that's
that
a-
requirement.
That's a
Yeah, I think it's a
terrible
policy call more than a legal one, but that's what I was going to comment on. I think you
But
phase that in or out, however you.
But technically, it
Yeah.
could be done.
well,
I mean,
the problem is if you start the process of grandfathering now, then are you going to grandfather every other change that happened over 20 years?
well, it depends on the change.
Yeah, I think the
Yeah.
ones that are detrimental,
Yeah. Okay.
right? I mean, like, this is not a new thing.
But I'm
Companies
just-
deal with this all the time.
Yeah.
I think the ones that, look, we'll be able to clearly see which ones shouldn't hurt the employee. You shouldn't do that to them. It's not fair.
Yeah.
But I will come back. If they don't sign this and agree to it, I got an issue with that. That's part of their new employees coming in, and hopefully our new employee orientation and all that stuff, they sign, we go over it and all that.
Right.
But on an annual basis, they need to sign it. To me, it is a condition of employment. So I don't know if y'all agree with that or
It's
not.
standard, I think.
Have all
yeah.
new, have recent new employees all received and signed?
It was the old manual, but we do have an orientation checklist that they sign off that we've gone over what the personnel manual is.
Yeah.
And they have to sign off that they know where it's at
Yeah.
and they've seen it. Go over orientation.
So just circling back to this topic, so theoretically we can affect changes and it does become binding per se on employees. What's the repercussions for, to the mayor's point, if they don't accept or if they just willingly breach? What is, do we
mean,
just say you're terminated or is there an actual
No, I think you can definitely do
that you can terminate?
that.
But if there's some, and I'm just curious, like on the social media, but let's say, make this up, but let's say an employee starts, putting negative social media points out in the public domain, and we believe that's damaging the town. Are there repercussions beyond just saying, well, you're dismissed because you've breached our policy manual?
I think the answer is yes with a big asterisk.
Right. Okay.
Got free speech issues and political speech issues that we've got to kind of weave and navigate those waters. Theoretically, if an employee breaches, if you will, our personnel rules, that's a disciplinary action up to and including termination.
Okay.
Right. We want to start off with, and we've had it, and I guess more from even the school world. Yes, everyone has their First Amendment rights, but once it becomes an issue at your job site, then it's a job site issue. It's
Right.
not that. So we've had to contact, not only here, I've worked at other districts, I don't want to put anybody really, but contact the person and just say, look, I already received a phone call from a parent. This is posted, and they're like, oh my gosh, I didn't know, it needs to come down. And 99% of the time, they're embarrassed and will take it down. You're going to have others, maybe my percentage shouldn't be so high, you'll have others that'll push back, but then that's when you start going into the disciplinary phase of how we're going to handle it.
Does the town use NDAs?
Not that I,
No, I'm just saying. Yeah, I came from where everything was NDA, and so, and they lasted for 40 years.
Well, one of the hindrances we have at local governments in Texas, there's been some rulings that NDAs are non-binding.
Sure.
Means we, in theory, can't do that.
No, I'm not a fan of NDAs. I'm just curious of it.
No, but I mean, and I bring up social media for a reason. I mean, I guess back to my question about enforcement, it's one thing if a current employee, is posting negative issues online, but I assume to the extent they leave and or are terminated and then start posting negative things online, I assume there's just no recourse at
Right.
that point. So to the NDA point, there's no way to have somebody abide by certain agreements upon their departure.
Pretty much once they separate, they're free.
Okay.
Now, also, here's another question, sorry. On retirements. So I came from a world of retirements that even if you retired, because you were receiving funds from the agency, that you still had some strings attached to you. That in some cases, you could get recalled, obviously, for a variety of items, or they discovered you did something bad and hid it because you were a senior person, and you had left. There was a clawback provision.
Yeah, I was just going to.
Yeah. Do we have any clawbacks?
I don't think so.
All right.
And I know we are matching, but TMRS really holds their money. That agency, I don't know that pulling that back. I would just hope that they do. But
Yeah, this would be
happen.
towards the individual.
Yeah.
But that's probably a stretch.
It is. No, I'm just saying. But and other federal agencies have done that, where they basically can pull you back.
Corporate world does too. On do something wrong after you leave, and you had options out there, stock that vested, come get it. I've seen that happen. But I think that's a little.
It is. Just questions here. All right, I think you guys have a lot of questions on this.
No, I was just going to ask, I mean, how do you feel with respect to where it presently sits, this document? Are there still issues you're trying to research, resolve, things you know we want to get somewhere but we're not there yet?
No, I'm after going through everything that was out there with the resources that I had, everything should be up to date. I knew that there would be some questions in light of the recent payouts if we wanted to change our sick leave policy, that one, and then the RIF policy as well. But otherwise, the language is up to date on any federal law or state law that we have out there, and that's really, those are the big pieces. We switched something out on the max number of hours for the firefighters to accrue as well, because that one way out there, 1,440 hours, but keep in mind, they work 24 hours a day, so that seems to accrue quickly. But I also say if we are going to change that we grandfather the 2 or 3 people that are already at that time, because they've dedicated that time, they're at those hours.
How's it drafted now?
Now we changed it.
So do you want?
How do I get back to the list?
So you want to add a grandfathering clause in there?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
So-
Switch the hours so it's that sick leave, and decrease the maximum hours for the fire personnel to 720 hours of accrual, but that we also add a grandfather clause in there. I didn't add it, I believe, to the first draft. That was just part of the discussion.
So when we do this stuff, federal agencies will have cost modules. Average federal employee makes 105, benefits is 27%. These are, and they can break down each of the impacts to this. Overall costing can show you one HR director costs this. Do we have anything of that nature that we do show the magnitude of what it costs to be?
Yes.
Okay.
We add all the benefits that are added in and what the total cost of what it really costs. Each fall I send out a compensation statement as well that breaks down not only what the salary is, but what the benefits are, and bring to light that the benefit that we do have, where our health and dental and vision are covered by the employer, how that kicks in versus.
Yeah.
It's real value.
Final question. Our counseling, our initial counseling, our performance reviews, are we up to date on that stuff?
There is a system, Trackstar. I will say the fire department is up to date on that. I'll give them kudos. We've started this conversation several times of using this Trackstar mechanism, but it's something that we can circle back to and implement so that we have all of our evaluations. And when you're talking evaluations, it's with, we're doing fiscal year, so we could have them, per se, all done by August or something, so that we know where we're going.
Do we have a standard evaluation form?
There's one built in this Trackstar system.
And is it employee-driven to start?
It has switched over, and actually Chief knows Trackstar a little better, so I'm going to let him speak to it. He was training the group up for a little bit, so.
So Trackstar is a pretty complex system, which is really good. It's an excellent tool. Love it.
Excellent.
Really puts the value in performance appraisal system. Uses it like they should be used. But you can make it very general and only have 1 or 2 sheets per all employees, or you can break it down by individual departments or job, the scope of the job. A lot of times what's happening, you might have a general section that applies to all employees. Then below that, you might have more specific, tailored to a department and different positions. You can set that up to do. You can do 360 evaluations. You can set it up as reminders. The great thing about TrackStar is really where the value in it is that it's designed to be a dynamic tool so that you're constantly making entries into it. So when you're sitting there interacting, having dialogue with your employees, that gets put in TrackStar, just showing a record that, hey, we had a conversation. And what we encourage supervisors to do is just, at least once a month, make entries in there as to what's their just general performance in that month, so that we're not just documenting negative performance, we're documenting general performance, regardless of what it is. And then when it does come time to do the annual evaluations, and ours is based more on when they got hired or when they got promoted, and it's not everybody all at one time a year. You go back through that year, you have all your records. If you attach documents throughout that year for some reason or another, maybe there was a RIF or maybe there was a kudos letter or something, all that's attached right there within that. And when you do that annual summary or whatever, you have everything there. So it's.
But the fire station's the only one that uses it really right now.
We use it on a regular basis. Yes.
And then who reviews the performance and who actually reviews the performance analysis?
For the individual employee?
Yeah.
So what we do in the fire department is the supervisor does the performance evaluation, but what they have to do is we use a calibration process to where each supervisor has to meet with the other two supervisors, and they have to discuss the individual performance evaluation so that it synchronizes, it calibrates, and it gives the same value of what good performance or excellent performance.
You don't have an easy grader messing up your curve.
Right. So if you've got a supervisor and they're fishing buddies with this guy, he's going to rate him high, but other officers.
But who at the end of the year actually reads this? And what's the purpose of a performance review if we don't act on it? So I guess that's my question.
Well, we do, and it's part of our professional development program that we have the officers meet with them on a regular basis, and they're constantly talking about performance and setting those goals, and it's like they give that constant feedback.
So you feel it's being used dynamically at the fire department?
In the fire department, yes, sir.
And in the town?
In the town, since I've been here, we've started conversations. It would have to be some of the folks that have been here longer than I have as to how it was being utilized. Yes, sir.
It's been a couple of years.
Oh,
Okay.
sure.
Well, is it in the policy manual here?
It is in the policy.
It is. What does
And
it say?
should be, sir,
What does it say?
that we should be evaluated once a year.
Okay, but does it say why and what the expectations are, and if you're not performing, is there a repercussion? I mean,
we can look it up to see what it actually says. I don't have it. Sorry.
David, it sounds like,
I know what you're
we're
getting.
behind.
To me, sometimes you have evaluations and it's just a common practice, do it, but is anything coming of the evaluation?
We don't want, Chief, what you explained was, through my 35 years, that's the best way. You calibrate it, you have conversations, you're looking at it, it should be feedback. The monthly deal dynamic. You don't want a manager to go in there or supervisor go in there and say, okay, how did this year go? We need to keep. But I know we're not where we need to go, Sandy, but we need to get there. We have the tool, we just don't have the process in place. Does that make sense?
no, I think it makes sense because I think if we use the tool properly, we avoid big problems. Because I think, employees may not realize that there's a performance issue or
Absolutely.
and that's, I think, if early intervention is far better, and that's
you don't
that's
want to
really my
surprise
point.
someone at evaluation.
100%.
And in the system, do you have a rater and then a senior rater?
Well, what we do is the way it's set up. You can set it up some different ways, but what we do is that once that supervisor sits down with that employee and gives them that evaluation, before they actually sit down with it, it has to go up to the next level, and they have to approve off on that, and then they go meet with that employee. And it comes up to me, and then I'll finalize that to.
Who does you?
Sorry?
Who does yours?
Who does mine?
Yeah.
Town manager.
And they do that every year? Okay.
So this is the stuff that just drives me crazy. This is the this is 101 of managing an organization, right? I know, like, we have to get this stuff in place. You know, anything I can do to help on that, we spent a lot of time in my world doing that. I love your practice, you know, but anything you can help. And I like an employee-driven, that they have to start the review process. Then I want tracking in place to know who hasn't gotten done, who hasn't had the conversation. I'll sign off. Dynamic, but I love what you have in place. That's world class.
That's what the policy reads. It's just pretty standard, but just that we should have one every year and turned in. I mean, we need to put the policy.
This is clearly sarcastic. How do we figure out their raises?
Raises are across the board. So they're not performance raises.
So it's just, there's no meritocracy.
There's no merit. And when you do that, I'm going to bounce over to the school also. There's a lot of documentation that has to go into proving what are you going to prove why a person should receive that raise and not receive that raise. So is it because this class had high test scores and this one didn't? And so I know it coming from the school world also, and in the town, what I'm gathering is that there were merit raises given. But again, is it my buddy? You're going to get
Based
2,000. You're going to get, you know, so there has to be some guidance to it and sticking with it for years to come, because then it just becomes unfair.
We got work to do. That's fine.
Yes.
That's the
A
fun
lot of
part
work.
of it, right?
All right, we'll set up a further on this one down the road. And we'll close this out and take a 10-minute break.
And Sandy, thank you for this. Is huge.
Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
This
for
is the
getting
devil,
on
on this one. The devil's in the details.
Yeah, but
and you don't know it's an issue until it becomes an issue, and then you find out it's an issue. Thank you. All right, let's take a quick break before the regular meeting, and we'll start up at 5 o'clock with the regular meeting.